Let's talk about the day everything changed. The day I got engaged, and the day Milo vanished. Not before, not after. Precisely on that rain-lashed Tuesday evening, October 19th, while champagne bubbles fizzed on my tongue and a diamond caught the low light of the bistro, he was gone. Poof. Like smoke. Like he'd never curled his warm, purring weight against my thigh while I graded papers late into the night. Ever had that feeling? That cold, hollow space where something warm and alive used to be? It starts in the gut, a sudden lurch, then spreads outwards, chilling your fingers, your throat. That's what finding an empty apartment felt like. Not just empty of Milo, but empty of everything. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was accusing, heavy, deafening. My name is Clara Finch. And back then, I was a walking bruise. Not the visible kind. The kind you carry deep inside, tucked away behind carefully applied mascara and sensible cardigans. I taught high school literature, trying to ignite sparks in sleepy teenagers while my own inner flame felt dangerously close to guttering out. 6 months before Milo disappeared, my dad thought he stopped. Just stopped. A heart attack, swift and brutal, while pruning his prize-winning roses. 1 minute he was humming Sinatra, the next, gone. The world tilted on its axis that day, and I never quite managed to get it level again. Mom was elsewhere, lost in a grief so profound it was like she'd slipped beneath dark water. Phone calls went unanswered. Visits were met with vacant stares and trembling hands. My fiancé Ben? Wonderful Ben, solid and kind as an oak tree. He tried. How he tried. But his world was stable, predictable. Engineering blueprints and weekend hikes. He couldn't navigate the jagged, shifting landscape inside me. He'd hold me, murmur comforting words that felt like pebbles dropped into a bottomless well. The loneliness, even beside him, was a physical ache, a constant, low-grade hum of sorrow, which is why I ended up at the Whiskered Hope shelter that dreary Saturday afternoon in late August. Not to adopt. Absolutely not. My apartment lease barely allowed pets, and honestly, I felt too fragile, too fractured to be responsible for another living thing. I told myself I just needed distraction. Something alive and uncomplicated to look at. Something that didn't expect me to be okay. The shelter smelled of antiseptic, kibble, and that faint, underlying scent of animal anxiety. Cages lined the walls, a chorus of hopeful meows and wary silence. Volunteers moved with practiced calm. I walked slowly, feeling a familiar pang of guilt. How could I possibly choose? How could I look into all these eyes and walk away? And then I saw him. He wasn't in a cage. He was curled up on a worn armchair in the corner of the cat room, tucked away like an afterthought. A big boy, maybe part Maine Coon, with fur the color of storm clouds and dust, a swirling mix of gray and charcoal. But it wasn't his size that caught me. It was the stillness, an unnerving, watchful stillness. While other cats pressed against cage bars or batted at toys, he just existed. Observing. His eyes were huge, ancient, a luminous, unsettling shade of gold green, like sunlight filtering through moss. They locked onto mine the second I entered the room, unblinking. Not pleading, not scared, just knowing, as if he'd been waiting for me. A volunteer, Sarah, noticed me staring. She walked over, her smile gentle but tinged with something, caution? You've met the Watcher, she said softly. That's Milo. Been here longer than most. Bit of a mystery. Milo, I murmured, unable to look away from those eyes. Yeah. Came in as a stray about 8 months ago. Pretty beat up. Had this nasty infection in his right ear. She gestured subtly. I saw it then, the ragged notch missing from the tip of his right ear. A battle scar. Healed up fine, physically. But he's different. Doesn't really play. Doesn't seek affection like the others. Just watches. Sits in that chair most days. Observes everything. She lowered her voice. Honestly, we weren't sure he'd ever get adopted. He's not cuddly. Something twisted inside me. Different. Not cuddly. A mystery. Words that resonated with the broken parts of me. I took a hesitant step closer. He didn't flinch. Didn't purr. Just held my gaze with that unnerving intensity. His fur looked thick, slightly unkempt. He radiated a quiet dignity, a profound solitude that mirrored my own. He looks sad, I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. Sarah tilted her head, considering him. Sad? Maybe. Or maybe just waiting. He's got this weird habit. Every afternoon, around 4 p.m., he hops down from the chair, walks over to the window that looks out onto the parking lot, and just stares. For exactly 10 minutes. Like clockwork. Then he comes back. No one knows why. I knelt slowly, keeping a respectful distance. Hey, Milo, I breathed. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, rusty and used. What are you watching for, big guy? He blinked. Slowly, deliberately. The cat's I love you blink, they call it. But this felt deeper. More like acknowledgement. Recognition. He stretched one massive paw forward, claws sheathed, and placed it delicately on the worn rug between us. Not reaching for me. Just marking the space. Claiming it. Or offering it. His presence was a quiet hum in the room, a counterpoint to the shelter's bustle. I felt a ridiculous urge to touch him, to see if that thick fur was as soft as it looked, but I held back. He wasn't inviting that. He was inviting presence. Shared silence. I sat down fully on the floor, legs crossed. I didn't speak. I just looked back at him. The noisy kittens, the hopeful meows, Sarah moving to clean another cage, it all faded into a blur. There was just this enormous, scarred, watchful cat, and the hollow space inside me. We sat like that for long minutes, a silent conversation passing between his ancient gold-green eyes and my own weary, grief-clouded ones. He understood stillness. He understood loss. I could feel it radiating from him, a tangible thing. It wasn't warmth, not yet. It was resonance. The quiet hum of two broken tuning forks finally finding the same frequency. Sarah eventually came back. Making friends? She asked gently, surprised. I don't know, I admitted, tearing my gaze from Milo's. He's intense. Sarah supplied with a knowing smile. Is that? Look, I know you said you weren't looking to adopt, but sometimes they choose us, you know? She handed me a small piece of paper. Think about it. His info's there. No pressure. Just think. I took the paper, my fingers trembling slightly. Milo finally looked away, turning his massive head towards the window. It was 3:55 p.m. His ritual was about to begin. He gracefully uncurled himself, stretched with luxurious slowness, revealing powerful shoulders and a plume of a tail. Then, without a backward glance, he padded silently across the room to the large window overlooking the rain-slicked parking lot. He sat, perfectly still, watching the gray afternoon with unwavering focus. I stood up, the paper clutched in my hand. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with excitement, but with a strange, profound sense of collision. like two lost ships spotting each other's lights in a vast, dark ocean. The loneliness inside me shifted, just a fraction. It didn't shrink, but it suddenly felt seen. Recognized. By a cat with a notched ear and eyes that held centuries. "I'll think about it," I said to Sarah, my voice barely a whisper. My eyes stayed fixed on Milo's broad, still back, framed by the rain-streaked glass. He didn't turn. He was deep in his watch. But as I walked out of the room, pushing open the heavy door, I swear I felt the weight of his gaze follow me. Just for a second. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. I sat in my car, the shelter flyer with Milo's picture and number lying on the passenger seat. The engine was off. The only sound was the rhythmic plink, plink, plink of water dripping from a nearby gutter onto the asphalt. I traced the ragged edge of his notched ear in the photo. Different. Not cuddly. A mystery. The hollow space inside me echoed. It echoed with the memory of my father's laugh, with my mother's vacant eyes, with the terrifying, beautiful weight of Ben's ring box in my purse. And now, it echoed with the image of those ancient, watchful gold-green eyes. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my own eyes. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a question, a low, insistent thrumming beneath the surface of my grief. "What are you watching for, Milo?" And deeper, quieter still, a whisper only I could hear, brushing against the raw edges of my heart. Maybe I'm not as alone as I feel. Bringing Milo home felt less like an adoption, and more like hosting a silent, furry ghost. He didn't explore. He didn't hide under the bed. He simply materialized. From the carrier, he flowed like smoke onto the faded Persian rug Clara's father had given her years ago. He sat squarely in the center of the living room, utterly still. Those impossible eyes scanned the space, the bookshelves groaning with novels and poetry collections, the worn armchair by the window, the framed photograph of her parents laughing on a beach vacation, taking it all in with unnerving focus. Clara knelt slowly, a respectful distance away. "Welcome home, Milo," she whispered, the words feeling absurdly loud in the thick quiet. He didn't flick an ear, didn't glance her way. His gaze lingered on the photograph. For a long, suspended moment. Then, with the same deliberate grace he'd shown at the shelter, he stood, walked silently across the room, and settled himself beneath the window, not the one overlooking the bustling street below, but the smaller one facing the quiet, tree-lined alley. The late September light slanted in, dust motes dancing in the beams, catching the silver strands in his gray fur. He resumed his watch, as if he'd never left the shelter chair. Clara exhaled, a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So that's how it's going to be." She busied herself unpacking the few supplies she'd bought. A simple ceramic bowl for water, another for food, premium kibble, recommended by Sarah, a litter box tucked discreetly in the bathroom. She placed the food bowl near the kitchen doorway, filled the water bowl to the brim, set the litter box with fresh, clean granules. Then she retreated to her small desk in the corner, piled high with essays waiting to be graded. Hamlet. 10th graders wrestling with existential dread. She felt a kinship. Hours passed. The city sounds outside shifted, the rush hour honking fading into the quieter hum of evening. Clara scribbled comments, her pen scratching the only sound besides her own breathing. She glanced up periodically. Milo hadn't moved. He was a statue, a sentinel guarding the alley view. The untouched food bowl seemed to mock her. What if he doesn't eat? What if he's just waiting to die here? The old, familiar anxiety, the one that whispered she was fundamentally incapable of keeping anything good alive, began to coil in her stomach. She pushed it down, focusing on Ophelia's tragic descent. It was only when the light faded completely, painting the room in deep blues and grays, that Milo finally stirred. Not towards the food. Not towards her. He stood, stretched with a slow, luxurious arch that made his spine ripple, then padded silently into the small hallway. Clara held her breath, listening. The soft click of claws on hardwood. Then, silence. She peeked around the corner. He had chosen the spot directly opposite her bedroom door. Curled up tight, nose tucked under his tail, a compact, shadowy mound on the cool floor. Claiming the threshold. Guarding? Observing? She couldn't tell. Sleep didn't come easily for Clara that night. The apartment felt different. Occupied, yet profoundly silent. She lay staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound from Milo. Nothing. Just the distant wail of a siren, the groan of the old building settling. She thought of Ben. He'd been cautiously supportive about Milo. "If it helps, Clara," he'd said, his hand warm on hers. But she'd seen the flicker of doubt in his practical eyes. Another responsibility. Another potential source of heartache for her. She squeezed her eyes shut against the image of her father's empty gardening chair. The silence pressed in. "He's here," she reminded herself fiercely. "He's just quiet." Morning arrived, pale and tentative. Clara crept out of her room. Milo was still curled in the hallway, but his head was up, watching her approach with those unblinking, moss-green eyes. She moved slowly, giving him a wide berth, heading for the kitchen to put the kettle on. When she turned back, mug in hand, she froze. He was standing now, in the exact center of the living room rug again, staring at her, not demanding, just present, as if cataloging her morning routine. "Good morning, Milo," she ventured, her voice thick with sleep. She gestured vaguely towards the untouched food bowl. "Hungry?" He didn't move towards it. Instead, he took 2 deliberate steps closer to her. Stopped. Tilted his massive head just slightly. Then he did something unexpected. He blinked. Not a quick flicker, but a slow, deliberate closing and opening of those ancient eyes. The "I love you" blink Sarah had mentioned. It felt less like affection and more like acknowledgement. "I see you. You are here." Clara's breath hitched. A tiny spark, fragile as a dandelion seed, flickered in the cold hollow of her chest. She blinked back. Slowly, deliberately. "I see you too." He turned then, finally, and walked with unhurried dignity to the food bowl. He sniffed it cautiously. Took a single, delicate bite. Then another. Clara leaned against the kitchen counter, the warm mug clutched in both hands, tears pricking unexpectedly at her eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was relief so profound it bordered on pain. He'd eaten. He'd acknowledged her. Small victories in the quiet war against the silence. The days began to settle into a strange, new rhythm. Milo remained an enigma wrapped in thick gray fur. He didn't meow. Ever. His communication was purely physical. The tilt of his head, the intensity of his stare, the deliberate placement of his large body. He claimed spaces, the center of the rug for contemplation, the alley window for his sacred 4 p.m. vigil. Clara timed it, 10 minutes exactly, every single day, the hallway floor outside her bedroom at night. He rarely sought physical contact. If she reached out to pet him, he'd often tense, subtly lean away, or simply move out of reach with quiet dignity. The stung, sometimes. She'd envisioned a purring lap cat, a furry comfort against her grief. Milo offered something different, silent companionship, a shared existence in the quiet. He began to reveal his personality in subtle ways. He was fastidiously clean, spending long minutes grooming his thick ruff after eating. He had a strange fascination with water, not playing in it, but watching it. He'd sit beside the bathtub, mesmerized as Clara filled it. The drip from the kitchen faucet could hold his attention for minutes. He was intensely observant. Clara caught him watching her grade papers, his head tilted as if deciphering the red ink. He'd watch her chop vegetables, his eyes tracking the knife with unnerving focus. He seemed to be learning her, mapping her routines, her moods. And Clara learned him. She learned the texture of his fur, dense and slightly coarse, like raw silk over powerful muscle. She learned the rhythm of his breathing when he slept in the hallway, deep and slow, a soft counterpoint to the city's night sounds. She learned the faint, clean scent of him, like dust and sunshine and something indefinably wild. She learned the weight of his presence. The apartment no longer echoed. It felt anchored, grounded by this quiet, watchful creature. She started talking to him. Not baby talk. Real talk. Sitting at her desk, grading yet another essay that missed the point of To Kill a Mockingbird, she'd sigh. They think it's just about racism, Milo. They miss the quiet courage. The standing up when it's terrifying. She'd glance over. He'd be on the rug, eyes half closed, but his ears would twitch minutely. Listening. Or so she imagined. One rainy Thursday afternoon, the gray sky pressing down like a sodden blanket, the weight of her father's absence hit her with fresh, brutal force. It was the smell of damp earth wafting through the open window, the smell of his garden after rain. She'd been trying to read, but the words blurred. A sob tore itself from her throat, harsh and sudden. She buried her face in her hands, the grief a physical wave crashing over her, dragging her under. The loneliness wasn't just an ache now, it was a drowning. She didn't hear him approach. She only felt it. A subtle shift in the air. A warmth near her knee. She lowered her hands, tears streaming down her face. Milo was there. Not on her lap. Not demanding attention. He had settled himself on the floor beside her armchair, his large body pressed firmly against the leg of the chair, leaning into it. His head was turned towards her, those luminous eyes fixed on her wet face. Not judging. Not alarmed. Just present. Witnessing. And then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted one massive, gray paw. Not to bat at her. Not to demand food. He reached out, his claws carefully sheathed, and placed the soft pad of his paw gently, firmly, on top of her bare knee where her leggings had ridden up. It wasn't a pat. It wasn't affection, exactly. It was contact. Grounding. An anchor point in the storm. He held it there. Heavy. His gaze never wavered from hers. The silent communication was deafening. I am here. You are not drowning alone. Clara stared down at the gray paw resting on her skin. The warmth seeped into her, a counterpoint to the icy grief. She didn't move. Didn't dare breathe. She simply let the solid weight of him, the quiet intensity of his gaze, the undeniable reality of that paw on her knee, hold her steady. The sobs subsided, replaced by ragged breaths. The crushing wave receded, leaving her shaky, exhausted, but tethered. He didn't purr. He didn't rub against her. After a long moment, he simply retracted his paw, settled his chin back onto his other front leg, and closed his eyes. But he stayed, pressed against the chair leg, a silent, furry bulwark against the void. Clara leaned her head back against the chair, closing her own eyes. The rain drummed softly on the window pane. The scent of wet earth lingered. The ache for her father was still there, a deep, familiar bruise. But the drowning sensation? It had passed, replaced by something else. Something small, fragile, but undeniably real. She reached down, slowly, hesitantly. Not to pet his head, just to rest her fingertips lightly on the thick fur of his shoulder, where it rose and fell with his steady breathing. He didn't tense, didn't pull away. He simply allowed it, a silent acceptance. a shared space in the quiet aftermath. That night, for the first time, Milo didn't sleep in the hallway. Clara woke around 3 a.m., pulled from a dreamless sleep. The room was dark. The city outside was quiet. And there, on the rug beside her bed, a dark shape was curled. Close, not touching her, but undeniably in her space. The soft rhythm of his breathing filled the room. A quiet rumble, almost imperceptible, vibrated the air. Not a full purr. More like the distant hum of a contented engine. Clara lay still, staring into the darkness towards the shape on the floor. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for months, it hadn't vanished. But it had changed shape. It wasn't an empty chasm anymore. It was a space shared with another solitary soul. A quiet understanding passed between them in the dark, wordless but profound. The scarred cat with the watchful eyes had crossed the threshold. Not onto her bed, not into her lap, but into the guarded territory of her grief. And in that silent, moonlit room, Clara Finch felt something she hadn't felt since her father died. A flicker of warmth, not from outside, but kindling somewhere deep within the cold hollow. Trust, she realized with a jolt, wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it was just a paw on your knee in the storm. Sometimes, it was the quiet sound of another heart beating nearby in the dark. Autumn deepened, painting the city in fiery hues that Clara barely registered. The fragile peace forged in the aftermath of her breakdown held, but it was a quiet, watchful thing. Milo remained her silent companion, a grounding presence in the swirl of her life. His routines were sacrosanct. The center of the rug for contemplation, the hallway vigil at night, the food bowl approached with deliberate, unhurried bites. And always, the 4 p.m. watch at the alley window. But something was shifting. Subtly at first, the intensity of his vigil seemed to deepen. Those ancient gold-green eyes, usually observing the alley with detached curiosity, now held a sharper focus. He'd track a specific point, a patch of cracked pavement near the overflowing dumpster, or the sagging back gate of the bakery 2 doors down. His stillness became charged, anticipatory. Clara would glance up from grading essays on Macbeth's descent into tyranny, her own anxieties mirrored in the text, and find Milo's ears pricked forward, his body a taut line facing the glass. Then came the scratching. It started softly. A week before the engagement dinner Ben had meticulously planned, Clara was trying to focus on lesson plans. The late afternoon sun slanted gold through the living room, catching dust motes. Silence reigned, broken only by the scratch of her pen, and then a new sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Like fingernails lightly dragging across rough fabric. She looked up. Milo was at his post. But instead of sitting statue still, his right front paw was extended. The pads, rough and dark, pressed against the lower wooden frame of the window. His claws, usually retracted, were just visible, not fully extended, but enough to catch the wood grain. He dragged them downward. Scritch, foot, then did it again. Scritch. His gaze never wavered from the alley below. It wasn't frantic. It was deliberate, purposeful, like someone trying to get a stubborn lid off a jar. "Hey, Milo," Clara called softly, rising from her desk. "What's got your attention, big guy?" He ignored her. Scritch, scritch. The sound was unnerving. It spoke of an internal agitation utterly foreign to his usual dignified calm. Clara approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. She followed his gaze. Below, the alley was its usual self, damp pavement, overflowing dumpster reeking faintly of stale bread and rotting vegetables, a stray tabby cat slinking along the far wall, a delivery van idling briefly before rumbling off. Nothing unusual. Nothing that seemed to warrant this sudden, focused scratching. "Milo," she said, a little firmer. "Stop that. You'll ruin the wood." He paused, turned his massive head just enough to look at her. The intensity in his eyes wasn't anger. It was urgency, a silent plea she couldn't decipher. He held her gaze for a long beat, then slowly, deliberately, turned back to the window. He didn't scratch again. Not then. But the tension radiating from him was palpable, a low hum in the quiet room. The scratching became part of the ritual. Not every day, but increasingly frequent. Always at 4 p.m. Always focused on that same lower corner of the window frame. Clara tried distracting him with treats, ignored, a feather wand, dismissed with a slow blink, even opening the window a crack. He recoiled slightly from the influx of cold air and street noise, but his focus remained locked below. It was baffling, worrying. Adding to the unease was Ben. The engagement dinner loomed. Ben, bless his solid, predictable heart, was bubbling with excitement. He'd drop hints about ring sizes, show Clara pictures of secluded beach resorts, talk about venues with a boyish enthusiasm that felt jarring against the backdrop of Clara's internal landscape. She loved him. She truly did. But the thought of a wedding, of being the center of attention, of stepping into a future that felt loud, while her mother was still lost in grief and her own heart felt like a fragile, half-mended thing, it filled her with a quiet panic. Milo wouldn't like a big wedding, she joked weakly one evening as Ben sketched table arrangements on a napkin. Ben looked up, puzzled. Milo? The cat? What's he got to do with it? He hates crowds. Noise. Clara traced the rim of her wineglass. He'd probably hide under the bed for a week. Ben chuckled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. He'll adjust. Cats do. We'll get him one of those fancy tuxedo collars. His smile was warm, reassuring, but it didn't reach the knot of anxiety tightening in Clara's chest. Milo wouldn't adjust. He wasn't that kind of cat. He was a creature of profound stillness and specific, unspoken rules. The chaos of a wedding felt like a violation of the fragile sanctuary they'd built. One drizzly Tuesday, the tension boiled over. Clara had received another call from her mother's care facility. She's having a difficult day, Miss Finch. Very withdrawn. Refused lunch. The news, coupled with a particularly frustrating faculty meeting and the relentless scritch emanating from the window as Milo worked on the wood like a tiny, focused carpenter, frayed her last nerve. Milo, stop it. The words burst out, sharper than she intended, laced with the exhaustion and fear she usually kept buried. Milo froze instantly. He didn't flinch. Didn't look scared. He slowly retracted his paw, claws vanishing. Then, with a deliberation that felt almost accusatory, he turned his entire body away from the window. He walked, not to his rug, not to the hallway, but directly to the framed photograph of Clara's parents on the beach. He sat down squarely in front of it. His back was rigid. He didn't look at the photo. He didn't look at her. He just sat, facing the wall, a silent, gray monument to what? Disapproval? Clara couldn't tell. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening, heavy with something broken. Guilt washed over her, cold and immediate. She'd yelled at the one constant in her fractured world. The one being who'd witnessed her grief without flinching, who'd offered silent solace with a paw on her knee. Milo, she whispered, her voice thick. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. He didn't move. Didn't flick an ear. He remained facing the wall, utterly still. The message was clear. The connection, the fragile trust, was severed. Clara sank onto the armchair, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a crushing sense of isolation sharper than anything she'd felt before adopting him. She'd pushed away the silent anchor. The apartment felt vast and echoing again, filled only with the drumming rain and the echo of her own harsh words. The next day was the engagement dinner. Clara moved through it like an automaton. She wore the dress Ben liked. She smiled when appropriate. She accepted the beautiful, sparkling ring, the gasps of delight, the toasts to their future. Ben's eyes shone with happiness. Her own felt dry and scratchy. Inside, a storm raged. The guilt over Milo warred with the panic over the wedding plans, the gnawing worry about her mother, the persistent, hollow ache for her father. She felt like an imposter, playing a role in someone else's joyful story. She came home late, the city lights blurred by unshed tears and exhaustion. The apartment was dark, silent. She braced herself for Milo's continued rejection, for his back turned towards her. But as she flipped on the hallway light, she froze. Milo wasn't facing the wall. He wasn't on his rug. He was sitting in the exact center of the hallway floor, right outside her bedroom door. Waiting. His eyes, reflecting the light, fixed on her face. Not angry. Not distant. Just watchful. Waiting for her. He didn't approach. He didn't purr. But as Clara stood there, clutching her purse like a shield, the dam broke. Tears she'd held back all evening spilled over, hot and silent. She slid down the wall, landing hard on the floor, burying her face in her hands. The weight of the ring on her finger felt alien, heavy. The expectations, the grief, the loneliness, it all crashed down. She didn't hear him move. But suddenly he was there. Not touching her. Not leaning against her. He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his thick fur. He didn't place a paw on her this time. He simply sat, present. His shoulder brushed lightly against her arm. A silent solidarity. She cried then, great, shuddering sobs muffled against her knees. Milo didn't move away. He didn't try to comfort her in any overt way. He stayed. His steady breathing, deep and slow, was a counterpoint to her ragged gasps. The silent, non-judgmental presence was an anchor in the emotional chaos. He wasn't forgiving her outburst, perhaps. But he hadn't abandoned her either. He was bearing witness, again, holding space for her unraveling. When the storm subsided, leaving her hollowed out and trembling, Clara lifted her head. Milo turned his massive head, those luminous eyes meeting hers. In their depths, she saw no reproach, no expectation, just a profound, ancient understanding. He blinked. Slowly, deliberately. I'm here. He stood then, stretched with languid grace, and padded silently towards the alley window. It was well past 4 p.m., but he sat down in his usual spot. Not scratching. Just looking out into the rain-slicked darkness of the alley. His profile was etched against the glass, strong, silent, scarred. Clara stayed on the floor, her back against the wall, the cold seeping into her bones. The ring glittered coldly on her finger. The engagement felt less like a beginning and more like a complicated knot she didn't know how to untangle. But Milo was a mystery she felt compelled to solve. His scratching wasn't random. It meant something. And his silent return, his steadfast presence even after her anger, it meant something more. She looked at the worn wooden frame around the alley window. The corner Milo focused on was noticeably paler, the paint scraped away in thin, parallel lines by his persistent claws. What lay beneath? What was he trying to reach? What was he seeing down in that alley that she couldn't? The questions coalesced, sharp and urgent, cutting through the fog of her own anxieties. Milo's strange ritual wasn't just a quirk. It was a clue, a silent plea she could no longer ignore. The scratching wasn't the problem. It was a symptom. And the alley window, suddenly, felt less like glass and more like a veil hiding something important. Something Milo knew, and she desperately needed to understand. The days after the engagement dinner bled into a tense, gray week. The diamond ring sat heavy on Clara's finger, a constant, cold reminder of the future hurtling towards her. Ben's calls were filled with venue ideas and caterer tastings. Her responses were monosyllabic, muffled by the roar of her own anxieties. But the loudest noise in her life wasn't Ben's enthusiasm or her own internal storm. It was the silence emanating from Milo. He hadn't retreated entirely. He still ate, still used his litter box with fastidious care, still took up his nightly post outside her bedroom door. But the connection, that fragile thread of silent understanding, felt frayed. He didn't lean against her chair leg. He didn't offer the slow blink. He moved through the apartment like a phantom, his usual watchfulness replaced by a heavy, preoccupied stillness. And the scratching, it intensified. Every 4 p.m., without fail, the scritch, scritch, scritch filled the apartment. A metronome of unspoken distress focused relentlessly on that lower corner of the alley window frame. The wood was visibly scarred now, pale slivers exposed beneath decades of paint. Clara tried to ignore it, burying herself in work, in wedding spreadsheets Ben emailed, in the impossible task of trying to reach her mother over the phone. But the sound was a physical pressure against her temples. It was Milo's voice, the only one he had, screaming in a language she couldn't understand. Guilt over her outburst gnawed at her, but beneath it bubbled a rising tide of frustration and fear. "What are you trying to tell me?" One raw, windy afternoon, the tension snapped. Clara was attempting to grade essays, the student's clumsy analyses of Othello's jealousy mirroring her own tangled emotions about the wedding, about Ben, about everything. Milo began his ritual. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Louder, more insistent than ever. The sound scraped across her raw nerves like broken glass. Enough! The shout tore from her throat, raw and ragged. She slammed her pen down, sending papers scattering. She surged to her feet, a desperate, reckless energy propelling her towards the window. Milo froze mid-scratch, his paw still raised, claws extended. He didn't flinch, didn't look guilty. He just stared at her, those gold-green eyes wide, unblinking, filled with a depth of pleading that stopped her cold. It wasn't anger in his gaze. It was pure, undiluted desperation. The kind that bypasses thought and strikes straight at the gut. In that instant, the frustration vanished, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. This wasn't a behavioral quirk. This was a cry for help. Silent, persistent, and utterly ignored for too long. "Okay," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Okay, Milo. Show me." She dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the cold draft seeping through the old window frame. Up close, the damage was worse. The wood wasn't just scratched, it was gouged. Tiny splinters stuck out. Milo watched her, utterly still now, his entire being focused on her actions. His breathing was shallow, rapid. Clara ran her fingertips over the scarred wood. It felt rough, brittle. She pressed gently near the gouged corner. It gave slightly. Not much, but more than solid wood should. A section about the size of her palm felt hollow, or loose. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She needed a tool. A screwdriver. Something thin and strong. Her eyes darted around the cluttered living room, landing on the fireplace tools standing sentinel beside the cold and used hearth. The poker. Its flat, wedge-shaped tip. Milo didn't move as she fetched it. He remained frozen, a statue of tense anticipation, his eyes fixed on the gouged spot. Clara knelt again, the cold metal heavy in her hand. She took a deep, shaky breath. This felt insane. Destroying her own window frame because her cat scratched it? But Milo's silent, desperate stare overrode logic. She had to know. Gently, carefully, she wedged the tip of the poker into the deepest gouge Milo had made. The wood groaned softly. She applied pressure, twisting slightly. A sharp crack echoed in the quiet room. A long, thin splinter of wood peeled away, revealing not solid framing, but a dark, narrow gap behind the outer layer. A void. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She worked the poker carefully, prying away more splintered wood. Milo leaned forward, his nose almost touching the expanding hole, sniffing intently. His tail twitched once, a sharp, involuntary flick. The gap widened. It wasn't a natural void. It was a deliberate cavity, shallow and narrow, hidden behind the window's decorative molding. And nestled inside, pressed flat against the inner wall, lay a small, rectangular object. Forgotten. Clara's breath hitched. She reached in, her fingers trembling. She pulled it out. It was a photograph. An old Polaroid snapshot, the colors faded, the edges slightly curled. She brushed off the dust with her thumb. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was a strange cocktail of relief and profound, life-altering weight. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. A thickening of the heart muscle Milo had likely carried for years, perhaps since birth, perhaps exacerbated by the stress of his earlier life as a stray. The vet explained it wasn't uncommon in large breeds like Maine Coons. The collapse had been a severe episode, likely triggered by an arrhythmia, a chaotic, inefficient heartbeat, possibly brought on by acute stress. The stress of her shouting? The frantic energy of her prying at the window? The terrifying sight of the figure in the alley? The guilt was a fresh knife twist. "He's stable now," the vet had said gently, placing a reassuring hand on Clara's arm. "But it's serious. He'll need lifelong medication. Twice a day. Strictly. No misses. He'll need to avoid stress as much as possible. Keep things calm, predictable." She'd looked at Clara, her gaze understanding. He's a fighter. He pulled through a major event. But his heart, it's fragile now. Fragile. The word echoed in the silent car ride home. Milo drowsy and subdued in his carrier on the back seat, Ben driving with careful precision. Fragile. It described Milo's heart. It described the tentative peace they'd built. It described Clara herself. Bringing Milo back into the apartment felt different. The space hadn't changed, yet everything had shifted. The gouged window frame, the cardboard patch, were stark reminders of the precipice they just stepped back from. The photo in her pocket felt like a live wire. Milo moved slowly, carefully. No more leaping onto surfaces. No more sudden bursts of speed. He navigated the familiar territory with a new, cautious deliberation, finding his favorite spots, the center of the rug, the space beside her armchair, and settling with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his diagnosis. The medication routine became the new heartbeat of their days. 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Clara crushed the tiny white pill, mixed it meticulously into a teaspoon of wet, salmon-flavored food. Milo, his dignity slightly affronted but his survival instinct strong, would eat it with slow, careful licks, his eyes watchful. Ben helped, taking the evening dose when he stayed over, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he offered the spoon. Milo accepted it from him with a slow blink. A tentative truce. Life moved forward, but the axis had tilted. The frantic wedding planning emails from Ben felt jarring, intrusive against the new, necessary quietude of Clara's world. The sparkling diamond on her finger caught the light differently now, not just a promise, but a demand. A demand for noise, for crowds, for attention, for stress, the very things Milo couldn't tolerate. The very things she recoiled from, her own fragility laid bare by Milo's crisis. One evening, a week after Milo came home, Ben sat beside her on the sofa. Milo was stretched out on the rug nearby, deep in a medicated sleep, his breathing a soft, steady rhythm. Ben took Clara's hand, the ring cold between them. "Clara," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "The venue, they need a deposit by Friday. And the caterer. Clara looked at him, then at Milo. The massive cat, his powerful frame now housing a delicate engine, vulnerable. She thought of the photo in her drawer. Her father's secret smile. The alley. The figure with the crowbar. The silent, desperate scratching that had nearly cost Milo his life to reveal it. She thought of the profound stillness Milo needed now. The stillness she craved. "Ben," she said, her voice quiet but clear in the hushed room. "I can't." He frowned slightly. "Can't make the deposit? We can." "No." She squeezed his hand, meeting his confused gaze. "I can't do the wedding. Not like this. Not now." The silence stretched. Ben's face shifted through surprise, disappointment, a flicker of hurt. "Because of Milo?" "Because of everything," Clara whispered. "Because planning this, it feels like screaming into a hurricane. Because Milo needs quiet. Because I need quiet. Because..." She took a shaky breath. "Because I found something, Ben. When I pried open the window frame. Something about my dad. Something hidden. And it feels enormous. And I need space to breathe. To figure it out. To just be." She told him then. About the scratching. About the hidden cavity. About the Polaroid. About her father, young and carefree with a woman who wasn't her mother, holding a tiny kitten, standing in their alley. About the hooded figure Milo had reacted to with such primal fury. About the terrifying collapse. Ben listened, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning understanding, then to a deep, protective concern. "Jesus, that's a lot. Are you okay? Do you need... Should we call the police about that guy?" "I don't know," she admitted. "It was dark. I barely saw him. And Milo..." She looked at the sleeping cat. He saw him. He knew. Something about that figure scared him enough to trigger this. She gestured to Milo's resting form. "I need to understand what that photo means first. Who that woman was. Why Dad hid it. What it has to do with..." Her voice trailed off, her gaze resting on Milo's notched ear. The old battle scar. A tiny kitten, cradled gently. Ben was silent for a long time. He looked from Clara's strained face to Milo, then out towards the patched window. "Okay," he said finally, his voice heavy but accepting. "We postpone. Indefinitely. No deposits. No plans. We just pause." He squeezed her hand again. "You figure out your dad's mystery. You take care of Milo. You take care of you." The relief that washed over Clara was so profound it brought fresh tears. Not the hysterical sobs of the vet's office, but a quiet, releasing flow. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. He held her. The diamond pressed against her skin, but the weight felt different. Lighter. A promise deferred, not broken. Milo's recovery was slow. Deliberate. Like the careful rebuilding of a sandcastle after a wave. He spent more time sleeping, deep, healing sleeps on his rug or beside her chair. His 4 p.m. vigil at the alley window continued, but it was different now. Quieter. He no longer scratched. He'd sit, sometimes for longer than 10 minutes, gazing out with a calm watchfulness. Clara often joined him. She'd sit on the floor beside him, her back against the wall below the patched frame, a book open but unread on her lap. Together, they'd watch the alley below. The comings and goings of delivery drivers, the stray tabbies' cautious patrols, the shifting patterns of light and shadow. It wasn't charged with tension anymore. It felt shared. A mutual observation post. A silent acknowledgement of the mystery that lingered out there, connected to the photo, to her father, perhaps even to Milo's own hidden history. She started investigating. Carefully. Quietly. She took the faded Polaroid to a local photography shop specializing in restoration. The old man behind the counter whistled softly. Classic SX-70. Haven't seen one of these in a while. He carefully cleaned the surface, revealing more detail. The young woman's laughter lines. The specific pattern on her blouse. The tiny kitten in her father's hand, a little ball of dark fluff, one ear already looking slightly crooked. Clara's heart clenched. She visited the bakery 2 doors down, buying a sourdough loaf and casually asking the elderly owner if he'd been there long. 35 years next spring, he'd beamed. She showed him the photo, her heart pounding. Recognize this spot? Or these people? He squinted, adjusting his glasses. The alley, sure, looks about the same, messier now though. The fella. He tapped her father's image. Looks familiar. Knew a guy used to live upstairs here, long time back, before my time even. Worked at the auto shop that used to be on Elm. Had a cat, I think? Nice fella, moved away sudden-like. The lady? He shook his head. Can't say. Pretty thing though. It wasn't much. But it was a thread. A guy who lived upstairs. Had a cat. Moved away suddenly. Clara didn't push further. Not yet. She tucked the information away, like the photo itself, in a mental drawer. Milo needed calm. She needed calm. The frantic energy of solving the mystery had to be tempered by the slow, steady rhythm of healing. Daily life settled into a new cadence. The twice-daily pill ritual. Quiet evenings reading, Milo stretched beside her, his presence a warm, grounding weight. Ben came over, but the visits were different. Quieter. They'd cook simple meals, watch movies with the volume low, talk in hushed tones about nothing consequential. The frantic wedding energy was replaced by a tentative, deeper intimacy forged in crisis. Ben learned Milo's new limits, speaking softly, moving deliberately. Milo, in turn, seemed to accept him, sometimes even deigning to rest his massive head near Ben's foot on the sofa. One crisp November afternoon, sunlight streamed through the half-drawn blinds. Clara sat on the floor, her back against the sofa, grading papers. Milo lay beside her on the rug, not sleeping but resting, his eyes half closed, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeam. His breathing was deep and even. The frantic fear of his collapse was receding, replaced by a watchful peace. Clara put down her red pen and looked at him. He turned his head slowly, those ancient gold-green eyes meeting hers. He blinked. Slowly. Deliberately. I see you. She blinked back. I see you too. She reached out, not to pet him, but to rest her hand lightly on the thick fur of his side, over the strong muscle that housed his fragile, miraculous heart. She felt the steady thump beneath her palm. A rhythm. A life. A silent testament to survival. The mystery of her father's photo remained. The question of the alley figure lingered. The future with Ben was an open question mark. But in that sunlit moment, with the soft weight of Milo's presence beside her, the steady beat of his heart under her hand, Clara felt a profound shift. The overwhelming grief for her father hadn't vanished, but it had integrated. It was a part of her landscape now, not the entire horizon. The panic about the future had softened into a quiet acceptance of uncertainty. The loneliness, it was still there, a familiar ache, but it no longer echoed in an empty room. It was shared with this quiet, scarred creature who had chosen her, trusted her, nearly died revealing a secret to her. She thought back to that first day in the shelter. The hollow space inside her. The watchful cat radiating solitude. Different. Not cuddly. A mystery. He was still all those things. But he was also hers. And she was irrevocably his. The scratching had stopped. The frantic searching for meaning outside their quiet world had paused. But the watching continued. Together now. From the shelter of their shared, fragile peace. The alley window, patched but not forgotten, remained a symbol. Not just of a hidden past, but of the present they were carefully, tenderly rebuilding. One slow breath. One steady heartbeat. One quiet, sunlit moment at a time. Life had settled into a rhythm dictated by quietude. Clara taught her classes, her passion for literature rekindled, finding new resonance in themes of resilience and quiet courage. She visited her mother, the visits still laced with sadness, but the raw edge of grief had softened into a melancholic acceptance. Ben was a constant, steady presence. The frantic wedding plans had dissolved, replaced by a deeper, quieter commitment. They talked about the future, a future that might involve a small, intimate ceremony someday, perhaps outdoors, somewhere peaceful. A future that definitely involved a low-stress environment for a cat with a fragile heart. Ben had become adept at spotting the subtle signs of Milo's fatigue, the slight flattening of his ears, the shallower breaths, and would instinctively lower his voice, dim the lights, create a pocket of calm. Their love felt less like fireworks and more like the deep, slow current of a river, carving its path with patient persistence. The mystery of the Polaroid remained, tucked away in Clara's mind like a half-forgotten dream. She'd done sporadic research, hitting dead ends. The bakery owner couldn't recall more. Online searches for her father's name combined with the bakery address yielded nothing. The woman's face remained anonymous, frozen in that moment of joyful laughter. The tiny kitten in her father's hand. Clara would sometimes look at Milo's notched ear, the thick gray fur, and wonder, was it possible? A descendant? A wild, improbable thread connecting past and present? She'd shake her head. Coincidence. Wishful thinking. Milo was Milo, her silent, scarred gift. Then came October. The air turned crisp, carrying the nostalgic scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. A familiar tightness returned to Clara's chest as the 19th approached. The anniversary. The day of the engagement ring, the champagne, the hollow silence of the apartment upon her return. The day Milo vanished. This year felt different. The raw panic was gone, replaced by a low thrum of sadness, a quiet acknowledgement of the loss that had precipitated so much change. She found herself looking at Milo more often, tracing the familiar contours of his face, the depth of his watchful eyes. His presence felt like a bulwark against the memory of that emptiness. He'd weathered the storm. They both had. On the morning of October 18th, Milo seemed off. Not ill, not lethargic, but restless. He abandoned his usual post on the Persian rug, pacing the perimeter of the living room with unusual agitation. His tail twitched. He'd pause by the alley window, stare out intently, then move on, unable to settle. He refused his morning pill-laced salmon, turning his head away with uncharacteristic stubbornness. Clara's anxiety spiked. Was his heart acting up? Was it stress? The approaching date? Easy, big guy, she murmured, crouching beside him as he paused by the repainted window frame. She placed a hand gently on his side, feeling the reassuring thump-thump beneath the thick fur. Steady. But his eyes, when he turned to look at her, held a familiar intensity. The ancient, knowing look. The one that had seen her through her own breaking point. Only now, it held an edge of anticipation? Restlessness? He nudged her hand with his cold nose, then deliberately turned and walked towards the front door of the apartment. He sat down squarely in front of it, his gaze fixed on the wood. Waiting. Clara's brow furrowed. This was new. Milo rarely showed interest in the front door. His world was the apartment, the alley view. The outside world, beyond the controlled trips to the vet, held no appeal. Okay, Milo, she said slowly, rising. What's going on? You need out? A walk. The idea was absurd. Milo on a leash? Unthinkable. He'd panic. Yet he remained seated, staring at the door. A low, almost inaudible rumble vibrated in his chest. Not a growl. Not a purr. A sound she'd never heard before. Anxious? Insistent? She opened the door a crack, peering into the empty hallway. Nothing. Milo pushed his nose against the gap, sniffing the air with deep, deliberate inhalations. Then, seemingly satisfied, he turned and walked calmly back to the center of his rug. He circled once, twice, and settled down, tucking his paws beneath him. His eyes closed. The restlessness vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. He was asleep within moments, breathing deeply. Clara stared, bewildered. What had that been about? A phantom scent? A sudden feline whim? She closed the door, the strange incident adding another layer of unease to the already charged atmosphere surrounding the next day. October 19th dawned gray and cool. Clara woke with the familiar hollow feeling in her chest. She moved through her morning routine mechanically. Milo seemed back to his normal, medicated self, accepting his pill with dignified resignation, eating his breakfast with slow deliberation. He took up his usual post on the rug, watching her with calm eyes. The restlessness was gone. The incident with the door felt like a dream. The day passed quietly. She taught her classes, the date a silent counterpoint to discussions of Shakespearean tragedies. She avoided Ben's calls, needing the solitude. She came home to the quiet apartment, the weight of the anniversary settling around her shoulders like a familiar, heavy cloak. She made tea, sat in her armchair. Milo remained on his rug, a silent, gray presence. Late afternoon approached. 3:55 p.m. Milo stirred. He stood, stretched with a slow, careful arch, mindful of his heart. He padded silently to the alley window. Clara watched him, a ritual that had become as much hers as his. He sat. He didn't scratch the repainted frame. He didn't stare with frantic intensity. He simply gazed out, his profile a study in quiet watchfulness against the glass. The city light was fading early, painting the alley in deep blues and purples. Scritch. Clara froze. The sound wasn't loud, but in the profound quiet of the apartment, it was as sharp as a gunshot. It came from the front door. Not the alley window. The front door. Milo's head snapped around. Not towards the alley, towards the sound. His ears pricked forward, swiveling like radar dishes. His body tensed, not with fear, but with acute focus. The ancient, knowing look was back, intensified. Scritch, scritch. It wasn't claws on wood. It was different. Softer. Like paper? Cardboard being dragged? Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The memory of the hooded figure flashed, sharp and cold. Was it him? Had he found them? Was he trying to? Panic, cold and familiar, threatened to rise. She grabbed her phone, finger hovering over 911. Milo stood. He didn't growl. He didn't hiss. He walked, with slow, deliberate steps, towards the front door. His tail was held high, not puffed but alert. He stopped a few feet away, staring intently at the base of the door. Then he did something extraordinary. He looked back at Clara. Not with fear. With expectation. He blinked slowly. The scritch had stopped. Silence pressed in. Clara took a shaky breath. Milo's calm, his focused expectation, was an anchor. He wasn't alarmed. He was waiting for her to see. She crept forward, phone still clutched, her pulse pounding in her ears. She peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, dimly lit, deserted. She unlocked the deadbolt, turned the knob, opened the door just a crack, ready to slam it shut. There was no one there, just the empty, slightly dusty hallway. And on the worn mat outside her door, a package, rectangular, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with rough twine. No postage. No address. Just her surname, Finch, written in neat, blocky letters with black marker. It looked like it had been hand-delivered. Recently. The scritch must have been it being pushed across the mat. Clara stared, her mind reeling. Milo nudged her leg gently with his head, then pushed past her slightly, sniffing the package intently. He didn't recoil. He didn't show aggression. He sniffed deeply, his whiskers twitching. Then he looked up at her again. That same look. Take it. Her hands trembled as she reached down and picked it up. It was light. Surprisingly so. She brought it inside, closing and locking the door behind her. Milo followed her back into the living room, his eyes never leaving the package. He settled back onto his rug, watching her intently. Clara placed the package on the coffee table. The plain paper, the rough twine, it felt archaic, deliberate. And why today? The coincidence was too stark, too unnerving. Her gaze flickered to Milo. His stillness was profound, expectant. With fumbling fingers, she untied the knotted twine. It fell away. She peeled back the brown paper. Inside lay a simple, unvarnished wooden box. The size of a jewelry box, but deeper. The wood was smooth, worn with age. There was no latch. She lifted the lid. Nestled inside, cushioned by yellowed tissue paper, lay two objects. The first was a small, tarnished silver locket. Delicate. Clara picked it up. It felt cool, heavy for its size. Her thumb found the tiny clasp. It sprung open easily, revealing two tiny, faded photographs tucked behind thin glass. On one side, a much younger version of her father, smiling that same carefree grin from the Polaroid. On the other side, the unknown woman. Her dark curls, her bright, laughing eyes. The photos were intimate, close-up portraits, clearly taken with love. Clara's breath caught. Proof. Tangible proof of a relationship her father had kept hidden. Her fingers traced the woman's face. The second object made her gasp aloud. Nestled beside the locket was a tiny, brass cat collar tag. Fresh. Its edges worn smooth by time. It was attached to a fragment of red leather collar, brittle with age. Clara lifted it gently. She turned it over. Engraved on the back, in small, slightly uneven capital letters, were two words. For Milo. A wave of dizziness washed over Clara. She sank onto the sofa, clutching the tag, the locket cold in her other hand. Milo. The name Milo. On a tag decades old. Found in her father's secret past. Given to her today. Her eyes flew to the cat on the rug. He was watching her, his gold-green eyes holding an expression that transcended feline intelligence. It was deep, ancient knowing. A quiet satisfaction. As if a long-awaited message had finally been delivered. For Milo. The tiny kitten in the Polaroid. Held by her father. Named Milo. Decades ago. And her Milo. Scarred. Watchful. Knowing. Drawn to this window. To this alley. Scratching at the hidden cavity. Reacting with primal fury to a figure in the darkness near the bakery. The bakery where her father's young lover might have lived. Where he might have lived. Where the first Milo might have belonged. The pieces didn't just click. They slammed together with the force of revelation. It wasn't just a descendant. It wasn't coincidence. It was him. Not literally, of course. Cats didn't live that long. But the name, the spirit, the impossible, soul-deep connection, her father's secret, his hidden love, his lost kitten, somehow echoing through time, finding her in her own moment of profound loss and isolation, guiding her to the truth he couldn't reveal in life, protecting her from a threat connected to that past. The hooded figure, someone connected to the bakery? To the sudden move? The implications were dizzying, overwhelming. Tears streamed down Clara's face, hot and silent. Not tears of sadness now. Tears of awe. Of profound, shattering connection. She looked from the tiny brass tag to the massive gray cat watching her from the rug. "Milo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Milo." He blinked slowly, deliberately. "I see you." Then he lowered his massive head onto his paws, his eyes closing. His breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. The messenger had delivered his final gift. His purpose, perhaps, fulfilled. Clara clutched the tag and the locket to her chest. The cold metal warmed against her skin. The hollow ache of the anniversary wasn't gone, but it was transformed. Filled with a sense of wonder, of a love story spanning decades, of a silent guardian sent across time. The alley window, the scratching, the collapse, the fragile recovery, it all led here. To this box. To this name. To the unshakable knowledge that her father, in some mysterious, beautiful way, had sent her a protector. Not just a cat. A legacy. A final, whispered secret. A love letter from the past, delivered by the quietest, most knowing soul she'd ever known. The silence in the apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of her father's youthful laughter, the ghost of a woman's joy, the tiny jingle of a brass tag on a kitten's collar, and the deep, steady breathing of the scarred cat who had carried the name, and the secret home. Clara doesn't tell anyone about the package. Not Ben, not her mother, not the few friends who still check in. Some truths are too fragile for words. Too sacred. Instead, she carries them inside her, like the locket itself, close to her heart, tucked away where only she can feel its weight. She wears the locket sometimes. On days when the grief for her father rises like a tide, when the unanswered questions about the woman in the photo press against her ribs. She doesn't open it often. She doesn't need to. Just the cool metal against her skin is enough. A reminder. A silent whisper. You were loved. You are loved. Love leaves echoes. Milo changes after the package arrives. Not in obvious ways. He still takes his medication with dignified resignation. He still watches the alley at 4 p.m., though now it's less a vigil and more a quiet observation. But there's a lightness to him. A looseness in the way he moves, as if some unseen tension has finally uncoiled. He sleeps more deeply. He blinks slower. And sometimes, when Clara is reading or grading papers, he'll press his forehead against her arm, just for a moment, before settling back into his own space. A silent thank you. A silent I know you know. The hooded figure never reappears. Clara keeps an eye on the alley, half expecting him to slink back into the shadows, but the weeks pass, then the months, and the bakery's back gate remains undisturbed. Maybe he was just a scavenger. Maybe he was something more, a ghost from her father's past, drawn to the same place Milo had been. She'll never know for sure. And somehow, that's okay. Not every mystery needs solving. Some are just meant to be carried. Ben proposes again on a quiet evening in December. No fanfare. No grand gesture. Just the two of them on the sofa, Milo sprawled across their feet like a living blanket. Ben takes her hand, the diamond ring still there, still catching the light, and says, softly, "Whenever you're ready." Or never. "I just need you to know, I'm here. However you need me." Clara doesn't answer right away. She looks at Milo. His ears twitch, but his eyes stay closed. His breathing doesn't change. No tension. No disapproval. Just peace. She says yes. The wedding is small. Just a handful of people in a sunlit backyard, the officiant's voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. Milo doesn't attend, too much stress, too many strangers, but Clara slips the brass tag into her pocket, a tiny hidden weight. A witness. A blessing. When she and Ben return home that evening, Milo is waiting by the door. Not pacing, not anxious, just sitting, his tail curled neatly around his paws, his gold-green eyes blinking slowly at them. "Welcome back." Clara kneels, pressing her forehead to his for just a second before standing again. No words. None are needed. Grief doesn't vanish. Love doesn't either. Some bonds aren't loud. They don't announce themselves with grand declarations or dramatic gestures. They're quiet, steady, a paw on your knee in the storm, a silent vigil at a window, a name passed down like a secret. Milo was never just a cat. He was a keeper of stories, a bridge between past and present, a reminder that love doesn't end, it transforms. It lingers, finds its way back. And Clara? She was never just his owner. She was the one who listened to the silence, who followed the scratching, who pried open the hidden spaces and found the truth waiting inside. Years later, when Milo's time comes, his great, scarred heart finally stilling in her arms, Clara doesn't fall apart. She weeps, of course, shakes, but she doesn't drown, because he left her something. Not just the locket, not just the brass tag, a way of seeing. Now, when she passes an alley, she looks twice. When she hears a scratching sound, she pauses. When she meets a cat's eyes, she wonders, "What are you trying to tell me?" And sometimes, when the light is just right, when the air smells like rain and old brick, she could swear she sees him, just for a second, out of the corner of her eye. A shadow, a flicker of movement, a silent watcher, making sure she's okay. Then it's gone. But the love stays. Speech Balloon, did this story touch your heart? Let us know in the comments below. Bell turn on notifications so you never miss an emotional story like this. Thumbs up, like, and share if you believe love never truly disappears. It just finds new ways to reach us. Mobile phone with arrow, tag someone who needs to hear this today. Thank you for watching. Until next time, listen for the scratching. Forwards.